Roald Dahl's The Witches, along with other books he wrote, is along the line of children's novels with a strange premise that serves the purpose of conveying an everyday moral. In this case, the whole idea is to be careful around strangers. It's not a widely known book, but it's been adapted onto the stage as a radio dramatization, and most famously the 1990 Nicholas Roeg version, and very recently released was a remake starring Anne Hathaway, and directed by Robert Zemeckis, who also directed the Back to the Future films. Starting right off the bat is a pretty small difference between the novel and the Roeg version, but worth mentioning. The lead character, who is a young boy who lives with his grandmother after his parents die in a car crash, was not given a name in the original novel, but the 1990 version takes care of that by calling him Luke. He and his grandmother live in a world where witches exist and masquerade as ordinary women, preying on innocent children with the intent of killing them. One day, while they're at a hotel, Luke eavesdrops on a witch convention, overhearing that the Grand High Witch, played by Angelica Huston, plans to inject drops of a potion into products in sweet shops. The idea is that children would buy the sweets, and by consuming them, the effects of the potion kick in, and they turn into mice. Luke soon gets caught and turned into a mouse, and now he and his grandmother must foil the evil plans of the witches. Already, this sounds like an interesting film just from that description. Granted, it does display a lot of plot up to the halfway point, but it should be enough to make you say, hey, I think I want to check this out. You're not going to regret it. It invents a new perspective from which you would see witches. They may look like ordinary women, but their hair is just a wig, their faces are just masks to hide their long noses. With a purple flash their eyes, they can be identified. With their noses, they can smell a child who has showered recently, and it would seem to them as the smell of dog's droppings. I'm not kidding. Angelica Huston's performance is one of the best parts, especially when you see what she actually looks like when she doesn't look like an ordinary woman. Look at that makeup! For the time, this was very impressive. Over time, you notice a few little buffers in the makeup department, which makes it look a little dated. But if you ignore it, you'll notice some true artistry. Despite all that makeup, Huston doesn't show the slightest sign of feeling uncomfortable. Now that's what you call acting. While Luke is a mouse, the puppetry/animatronic work is also really good for the time. Even today, it is an amazing display, especially up close. When he talks, you really feel like he's talking. That's how good the lip sync is. Still looks like a puppet talking, but that's the whole beauty of it. After all, one of the producers of the film is Jim Henson, creator of The Muppets and co-director of The Dark Crystal. Just looking at this film, you can hardly go wrong with these effects. Today, this would be CG, and it would look a bit more cartoonish. Speaking of cartoonish, looking at the poster for the film may give you the impression that the film would be a mix of live action and traditional animation, like in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, even though that's not the case. It's like the designer of the poster never actually watched the movie. I don't know, maybe that was on purpose. Luke's grandmother is honestly one of the coolest grandparents in film history. Not only does she raise Luke after the death of his parents, but she teaches him what he needs to know about witches and how to identify them. She is able to do so because of her own experience, and together, she and Luke can come up with the best plans possible to wipe those evil witches off the face of the earth. Now that I mentioned it, one of the biggest differences between the film and the book is the ending, which Roald Dahl was not very happy about. Major spoiler warning, so skip to this timestamp to avoid the spoiler. According to the book, after the Grand High Witch and her associates get turned into mice, the boy and his grandma go back home and plan to travel to Norway and destroy all the witches. Unfortunately for the boy, still a mouse, he would only get to live 9 years after these events, which he is content with because he wouldn't want to outlive his grandmother in fear of someone else looking after him. This ending was shot after Dahl got word that Roeg was changing the ending. The film version brought in this witch who was maltreated by her boss up to the point where she quits. After the witches are turned to mice and Luke and his grandmother plan to destroy all the witches in the United States, that witch who quit comes up to the house and turns Luke back to human. When Dahl saw the more faithful ending, he was so moved to the point where he was brought to tears. But Roeg went for the more upbeat ending, which upset Dahl, who demanded his name be removed entirely from the credits and threatened a publicity campaign against the film. I don't blame him, but history is history, and the film version of The Witches will have a big sting at the end that separates it from its source material. As far as Dahl's outrage goes, Jim Henson urged him to dissuade from his threats. When the film first came out, while it did receive critical acclaim, it flopped in the box office. Over the years, though, it received a cult following, and as I mentioned before, we recently received a remake. Judging from the trailer, it definitely looks like it's not going to be an improvement over the original. Especially all these mice. Ugh, how do we get so far from animatronic, better-looking mice and these CG cartoonish-looking mice? Oh, whatever, I just love practical effects better than CG technology, though sometimes CG can be dominant, but that's not my point. My point is, this version by Nicholas Roeg deserves checking out if you haven't seen it already.